Welcome back to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the tragic and frankly total self-destruction of the Targaryen dynasty during the infamous Dance of the Dragons. We're going to map out exactly how a family holding the ultimate weapon of mass destruction managed to just burn their own absolute power completely to the ground.
Now 17. That number is absolutely crucial to understand the sheer scale of the devastation we're talking about here. The Targaryens started this civil war with 20 living dragons. By the time the dust settled, 17 of them were dead. And the biggest takeaway for us today is that they didn't lose these dragons to some superior outside enemy. No, they lost them to each other. So let's break down exactly how this happened.
All right, Section 1, the point of no return. So it all kicks off high up in the sky above Shipbreaker Bay with the death of young Lucerys Velaryon and his dragon, Arax. What's super interesting here is how the lore gives us two differing accounts. The show adaptation paints this fatal encounter as a tragic, accidental panic, right? The massive Vhagar basically disobeys Aemon and devours the boy. But if we look at the book, it frames the whole thing as cold-blooded murder, placing the blame firmly on Aemon's shoulders. But honestly, regardless of his intent, Lucerys was flying under a messenger's banner. His death crossed a massive boundary that both sides had previously respected.
And that leads directly to a truly chilling retaliation. A son for a son, a child for a child. Rhaenyra's faction, the Blacks, absolutely demanded blood. So Daemon sends these assassins, known as Blood and Cheese, sneaking into the Red Keep. They literally force Queen Helaena to choose which of her young sons would die, and then they brutally murder Prince Jaehaerys anyway. The point here is that before this exact moment, the war still had some limits, but after Lucerys and Jaehaerys, those boundaries were officially gone. The dance had truly begun.
Moving right along to Section 2, Escalation in the Skies.
Now the conflict shifts from shadowy castle corridors straight out into the open air at the Battle of Rook's Rest. Princess Rhaenys flies her formidable dragon, Meleys, into what turns out to be a massive trap. Notice how the show actually adds this crazy layer of factional infighting. In the TV retelling, a drunken Aegon II flies in, gets absolutely battered by Meleys, and then his own brother Aemond seemingly uses the chaos to yell Dracarys, like he's totally willing to burn his own brother alive just to take down Rhaenys. The book presents a much cleaner, unified ambush, where both brothers attack together. But either way, Vhagar ambushes Meleys and crushes her neck. The Blacks lose their very best dragon rider, and the Greens win, but it leaves their king, Aegon, horribly burned and broken.
Looking at the years between 129 and 130 AC, we see a really rapid, horrific bleeding of resources. After losing Arax and Meleys, the war shifts to the Battle of the Gullet. And this is just tragic. The Blacks lose their 15-year-old heir, Jaehaerys. He wasn't just a rider, he was the brilliant diplomat basically holding their entire coalition together. His dragon Vermax is brought down into the sea. And on that exact same day, his younger brother Aegon narrowly escapes on Stormcloud, who takes terrible wounds and dies right after getting the boy to safety. So that's 4 dragons down, and the toll is just skyrocketing.
Which brings us to Section 3, Mutual Annihilation.
This phase of the war is where things pivot from a battle for a throne into a completely apocalyptic personal vendetta. Daemon had been hunting Aemon for months, and he finally tracks him down above the God's Eye Lake. Now, Daemon's dragon, Caraxes, could not match the ancient Vhagar in size. Literally no living dragon could. So Daemon turns this size disadvantage into a catastrophic mid-air grapple. Caraxes dives right out of the sun on Aemon's blind side, locking his jaws onto Vhagar's neck, and then, as they are plummeting toward the water, Daemon actually swings out of his saddle, leaps onto Vhagar, tears off Aemon's helm, and drives his sword Dark Sister straight through Aemon's sapphire eye. It is wild.
Both of these massive dragons slam into the lake with earth-shattering force, dying right alongside their riders. But zooming out for a second, the crucial takeaway is that this was essentially the Westerosi equivalent of mutually assured destruction. It wasn't just an epic cinematic duel, it was a total military disaster for everyone involved. The Greens lose the one dragon that could dominate the sky purely through size and terror. And the Blacks? They lose their most experienced, dangerous military leader. It violently shifted the balance of power and left this massive vacuum in the war.
All right, Section 4, the Dragon Pit Massacre.
Now, as if dragon-on-dragon violence wasn't bad enough, the conflict completely devolves into pure, unadulterated populist anarchy. Rhaenyra held King's Landing. Well, physically anyway. She definitely hadn't won over its people. It's fascinating to watch how this perfect storm of an empty treasury, brutal new taxes, and mass starvation sets the stage for a total breaking point. Then the beloved Queen Helena dies in captivity, which sparks rumors that Rhaenyra actually murdered her. Finally, you have this fanatic preacher known as the Shepherd, who harnesses all this grief and fear. He starts calling the dragons demons, inciting this massive religious fury that turns a terrified, exhausted populace against the dragons themselves.
And in just one single chaotic night, a mob armed with little more than axes and pitchforks achieves what entire armies couldn't. Trapped in chains, unable to take flight, the dragon's impenetrable scales are just totally useless against the sheer, crushing mass of thousands of bodies swarming into the great dome of the dragon pit. Shrykos, Morgul, and Tyraxis are slaughtered. The ancient Dreamfire manages to break free, but smashes into the dome in a panic, bringing half the roof down and crushing herself. And to make matters even worse, Rhaenyra's own mount Syrax flies into the fray riderless and is ultimately dragged down by the mob too. 5 dragons wiped out in one night. It completely broke Rhaenyra's spirit and her grip on the city forever.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Chaos and the Final Ashes.
So here's a question for you. What happens when chaos completely exceeds anyone's ability to actually manage it? This thought perfectly sets up the Second Battle of Tumbleton. Because at this point in the war, human agency, battlefield orders, military tactics, they've completely vanished. We're just watching absolute, unchecked destruction.
During this battle, the massive dragon Vermithor, whose rider had just been assassinated by the way, is left riderless, and without a rider to guide him, a dragon doesn't hold a tactical line. He becomes a weapon of pure chaos, indiscriminately attacking absolutely everything in reach, friend and foe alike. Seeing his own men getting slaughtered, this loyal rider named Adam of Hull intentionally drives his much smaller dragon Seasmoke down into Vermithor. He knows he can't win, and it results in this totally senseless 3-way collision of dragons, including the young Tragaryen that absolutely no general was directing. Adam, Vermithor, and Seasmoke all die in this massive tangle of mud and blood, and Tragaryen has to be mercy-killed shortly after.
And eventually the conflict crawls right back to where the whole thing began, Dragonstone. Aegon II captures the island and actually feeds Rhaenyra to his mangled dragon Sunfire. But Daemon's daughter Baela rides out on her nimble young dragon Moondancer and severely wounds the already crippled Sunfire before they crash into the yard. Sunfire's sheer weight ultimately crushes the smaller dragon. But honestly, even this final fight feels less like a strategic military battle and way more like the last, desperate gasp of a war that for sure should have ended months ago. Sunfire dies soon after from his extensive wounds anyway.
By the time Aegon II is poisoned by his own men and young Aegon III takes the throne to politically end the dance, the surviving numbers are just staggering. You have one wild dragon who basically ate his own kind, one that vanished entirely with its rider, one unclaimed dragon refusing any new riders, and one single tiny hatchling. That's it. It marks the definitive and frankly pathetic end of the Targaryen Age of Dragons.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to chew on. Did House Targaryen truly lose their dragons to war? Or did their own grudges, their unyielding pride, and their petty humanity just burn their absolute power to the ground? Because when you possess the ultimate power, the only thing that can truly destroy you is yourself. Thank you so much for joining me. Keep questioning the history you read, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.